5, 6, 7, 8.
Welcome to the EX Podcast, where every week I talk with business leaders, authors, and disruptors on how the workplace is changing. This podcast brings a different lens to the conversation around HR transformation, company culture, and employee engagements. It brings a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Why? Because companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talents. It is time we put people first to rehumanize the workplace. Simply because leaders who don't care about their employees will eventually be surrounded by people who don't care about their business. Today's guest is Cy Wakeman, an international speaker on leadership and management, a New York Times best-selling author, and a global thought leader. Today with Cy, we talk about why engagement is a choice. Why is employee engagement the true driver of employee performance? And we go through the 10 steps to better leadership that Cy advocates. Support for this podcast is brought to you by Culture Amp. Eliminate the guesswork of company culture with Culture Amp, the world's largest independent employee feedback platform. Culture Amp goes beyond aggregating survey results to deliver rich insights and data-driven action plans on an easy-to-use interface. With a powerful platform, science-backed surveys, and a focus on its customer success, Culture Amp helps you increase employee engagement and build a positive company culture. You can start developing a deep understanding of your employees' experience today by visiting cultureamp.com/future. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Cy, and because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it will help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at @EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Cy Wakeman. Cy is calling from Omaha in Nebraska, and she's an international speaker on leadership and management, a New York Times best-selling author, and a global thought leader. Cy, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
For those who don't know about you, tell us a bit more about who you are and maybe some of the companies that you've worked with.
I'm a drama researcher. I study how much time and energy is wasted in the workplace in the phenomenon that I call drama, which is unproductive thinking and disruptive behavior. And I've had the opportunity to work with organizations like Google, Facebook, NASA, Stanford Health Systems, Johns Hopkins. So about 50% of my time I'm in finance and high tech, and the other 50% in healthcare.
So when you talk about drama in the workplace, what it is exactly, and how do you get to the point of addressing this challenge in the workplace?
So drama, if you think of it, is simply defined as emotional waste. So if you think of our potential as human beings, that potential doesn't translate to performance, and there's something that distracts or interferes. And any of those things that distract or interfere with that potential equaling performance is drama. So venting, gossiping, scorekeeping, judging, withholding buy-in, resisting change, anything that hinders rather than helps us achieving the goals we set out.
I like the quote from one of your talks when you say engagement is a choice. So in your opinion, do employees make the choice of being engaged or not?
I absolutely believe engagement is a choice. And that comes out of a lot of the research and evidence around such things like happiness, although engagement is a decision to give your discretionary effort beyond happiness. But a lot of people believe their happiness or engagement level is dependent upon their circumstances. And the research really shows that engagement, happiness is more dependent upon your own accountability levels than your circumstances. And so I really believe that much of the engagement theory has gotten off track because they relieve the individual of accountability for their own engagement. And I think it's a choice. And I see that as I study people lower in accountability versus higher in accountability, I see that their circumstances are the same, but their reported engagement levels are very different. And that absolutely has to do with accountability and attribution. So to add one more piece of that, if someone who's lower in accountability feels any type of pain or discontent, they tend to attribute the source of that discontent to their circumstances and to the responsibility of the organization completely. If somebody who's high in accountability feels some sort of stress, suffering, discontent, they first look at what's their part in it, and then they attribute what's remaining potentially to the organization or circumstances. People low in accountability sort differently the source of their pain than people high in accountability. And this is important because if I believe that I'm a victim of my circumstances, the only option I have is disengagement. But if I believe I have impact over my circumstances, I can self-reflect and find many ways to plug and play and then answer that craving for engagement. So engagement's the byproduct of accountability.
There are some things that employees and individuals can manage. Some of the frustrations they can manage. They can work on finding a purpose that is going to motivate them. But there are things that they don't have any control over. We talk a lot about employees don't leave bad companies. They leave bad managers, for instance. So most employees don't have a choice of who their supervisor, who the manager is. How much choice do organizations have in driving engagements with the employees, knowing that there's a part of accountability on the employee side, but how much accountability is on the organization sides as well?
I think there is shared accountability, and the problem is that we're over-rotating on engagement as employers, and engagement without accountability creates entitlement. And here's where I would our research would differ a bit with what you just cited. So there are many things that employees nor organizations have control over, and if I'm an employee, the more skills I have, the more I can operate freely in any type of reality. And so I may not control who my manager is, but I absolutely can control my responses and my view of my manager, because when people are viewing through the lens of their own ego, they see injustice everywhere. And so if you toggle switch into a different part of your brain where you're into self-reflection and accountability, that same manager, when you get to the true facts of it, could be a very different person. Let me explain an example. I had a boss who called and checked on one of my projects. If I were to listen to my thinking, he's a micromanager who treats me like a child, doesn't trust my work. Now, when I edit my story and use a good mental process of accountability, I realize all he did was call and check on my project, that I added the story that he's a micromanager. That was my judgment. And so do I work for a guy who calls and checks on my projects, or do I work for a micromanager who treats me like a child when the only thing that happened was I got a call and someone checked on my work? That difference is whether I'm seeing my world through the lens of ego or not. Now, if my boss is abusive to me on the phone, I need to work with HR and make a change in that. But what people don't understand is they absolutely believe everything they think, and they trust their view of the world, even when it's a view that's very undisciplined. And so when people are in drama, which is emotional waste, the way you get rid of waste is to improve your process. And the way you get rid of emotional waste and drama in the workplace is to improve your mental process. And most people are making decisions to disengage based on poor mental processes, not on their reality. So their stress many times is coming from their story, not their reality. And my buy-in can't be optional, and only when my organization can control my reality to make it always perfect. That makes me so dependent that reality is never going to be controlled for me. And in the study that says employees leave their managers, we read that study and we did a different study. So at one employer, people did an exit interview and said, "Why did you leave?" And over 50% of them said, "We left because of our manager." So we took that employee, a group of employees, and we followed them through their next 3 jobs. And we asked them each time when they left why they left. And each time they said it was because of their manager. Well, what are the odds of the same employee 3 jobs in a row getting a horrible manager? And that's the problem with attribution, is because my story is my manager was bad. My engagement is I chose to stay with an unskilled manager so that I could learn how to be resilient even when I don't have everything I need. That's the difference that we're trying to help people understand.
That's a very interesting angle. Why is employee engagement the true driver of employee performance then?
I believe that it is the driver of performance. If you want to count for something, if you want to be valued, you need to add value. And once employees figure out that their engagement is their own buy-in and their own choices, then without drama, it drives performance because they're operating out of free will, knowing there'll be reality that they don't prefer, and given a messy reality, they still choose to engage. That's the ultimate driver of performance.
All right, so the next question is the measurement. How do you measure employee engagement's impact on the overall business performance?
So I would say that we already have metrics for performance, and whether you're meeting your own metrics tells you a lot about the engagement of your employees and the interferences. How we measure the value of one's work, right, and that performance, we measure an employee's performance, plus we measure their readiness for what's next, and we subtract out their emotional expensiveness, so the drama that they take away from the ideal situation. And we can get down to the level where people can measure their own value of their own work. But when it comes to the organization, I think measuring engagement is not going to predict future results. When you measure accountability, that is highly predictable of future results. And so for me, I would measure accountability levels as a better predictor than measuring engagement levels.
So what are some of the tools or the processes to measure accountability then versus engagement?
In my research, I took a psychology metric, locus of control, and I adapted it to the workplace. And we can really measure not self-reported, but from your mindset, the levels of your accountability in your commitment, your resilience, your ownership, your ability to continuously learn. And those psych metrics are very valid and reliable to measure whether someone believes that things happen to them, in spite of them, or because of them, whether they really believe that they have impact, and whether they take that opportunity to have impact. So when we do engagement surveys with our clients, we have an instrument that we measure typical engagement questions, how people report their experience of work. We also ask accountability questions, and then we sort the answers of the engagement questions by accountability levels so that we separate out the answers of people that register low in accountability, and we turn the volume up on people who register high in accountability. And it gives you a much better sense of what the true situation without interference is in your organization. And then you can know both accountability and the engagement level of the high accountables. And then you can fix what might be interfering with your results. So for instance, we believe that in the engagement survey, not every vote counts the same. Somebody who is disengaged in on performance plan and not doing their share or meeting expectations, it shouldn't have the same vote as somebody who's ready for what's next, highly skilled and driving forward. And so typically, if you look at just engagement scores, we had a case recently where 68% of the employees stated they didn't trust senior leadership. Now, that looks like there's a huge problem that senior leadership's not trustworthy. When we divided that out and looked at just high accountability levels, we found that of the high accountables, 98% trusted senior leadership in a top box way. So now, is it senior leadership that's not to be trustworthy, or are people who are unready for change blaming senior leadership? How do you answer the difference in that experience between low and high accountables? And the low accountables, if you have more, if you have an overrepresentation in your workplace, will corrupt your engagement data. So engagement itself doesn't necessarily measure performance, but engagement of the high accountables would be a better metric of performance.
What do you need to do to alter the low accountability of some of the employees?
Well, we believe the sweet spot is to focus on your medium and high accountables and keeping them accountable, and then engaging the high accountables based on working in a way that's shared in how to create great environments, not just physically. When it comes to low accountables, we can't fix that, but they could. And so I believe it's using performance management to help them understand expectations. And if they want to rise up to that, wonderful. And if they don't, then transition them out of the organization. Right. I think accountability is also a choice, and it's a key competency requirement for work.
Designing an engaging, empowering employee experience starts with the leaders in the organizations. And when I say leaders, it's at all levels, from the CEO down to the managers. Can you walk us through the 10 steps to better leadership that you advocate for?
Sure. And what I would say is we can't design an experience that creates engagement, but we can design an experience that most likely creates a great place to work for high accountables. And that if you try and please everybody, the same behavior can't please a low accountable and a high accountable at the same time. You really have to, you will upset someone when you're creating environments for engagement. And so testing just engagement gives you flaws in your data. So what I recommend is that you focus on creating environments that high accountables love and can work in, and that environment will displease your low accountables, so you'll always be upsetting somebody. But step one is figure out what your non-negotiables are and stop negotiating them. You don't have 100, but you have at least 10, and they're just not negotiable. But what we tried to do to please the low accountables is we start bargaining and softening and excusing. And that really is frustrating to our high accountables. And so figure out those non-negotiables and don't negotiate them. And when times are changing, rather than manage and try and fix things for folks, call people up to greatness and lead and really have people move into their accountability and then come together to respond to the change. When we start managing, we start over managing and fixing, and that interferes with the high accountables and it enables the low accountables.
I imagine that the non-negotiables are vary from one organization to another. But can you share with us maybe a few that you see consistently across organizations?
Absolutely. They can be really simple: dress code, safety equipment, clocking in and out. They can be meeting deadlines or civility. We negotiate civility all the time. We go, oh, they're a rock star. They're really unfit for human consumption. They don't work well with others, but they're amazing. And I would say we should never negotiate civility, professionalism, business discipline. A non-negotiable we have in my company is stop judging, start helping. If you are critiquing or gossiping or venting about another, stop, move to that person, ask them what you could do that would be most helpful next. And these are just, we put values out as a company and then we negotiate, and we don't address it when people don't honor their agreements around those values and when they violate their own integrity.
Okay, so the non-negotiables can be values as well as policies.
Yeah, policies, right. Values, behaviors.
Okay, step number 2.
So when there's changing times, you want to make sure that you're leading first and managing second. What happens so often is managers jump in to fix the reality or bend reality. And our reality isn't the reason we can't succeed. It's really the circumstances in which we must succeed. And so instead of trying to fix reality, focus on the people, grow the people so they can move through new realities more skillfully. Leaders tend to try and fix reality rather than grow the people.
When change happens, what is the role of the leaders? Is it to create the vision and get people on board and motivate them, or explaining to them what the change is going to be like and what impact is going to have on them? Is it to tell them exactly how to embrace change? What would you suggest there?
I would say we're really hurting accountability in the way that leaders are approaching change. When I went to a change management class, we spent 2.5 days filling the walls of all the things the leaders need to do. They need to tell people the why. They needed to define that change. They needed to support their people and set a clear vision. And I asked at the end of the training, I'm like, but what do the employees need to do? Like, what's their responsibility? Mm-hmm. And the room was really stumped. They were like, well, they need to wait for it or critique it or ask questions. And it was really not a shared responsibility. So in my book, No Ego, I take typical change management and we modernize it to something called business readiness. And so leaders are responsible not just when change happens, but for facilitating people's awareness and keeping it at a high level so that when change comes, people aren't surprised. They're like, oh, I saw that coming. And then leaders need to manage, they need to lead and manage the people. Instead of me motivating you, which I'm a therapist and you can't motivate another person, motivation's a choice. So I can't do all this for you, but what I can do is walk you up to a place you'll be successful. So I help you with your awareness, and then I test your commitment, your accountability. Are you willing? Are you in or are you out? And if you're willing, are you willing to advocate and not play both sides? Are you willing to say, yes, I'm in, and I'm going to use all my energy to work on how to make this happen? And what a leader basically does in leading, not managing, is they don't come up with the solution, but they manage the energy of the people. And so I set the vision, and most of the time the team wants to go into why it won't work and why we shouldn't have to, and they're objecting the energy away from why we can't to how we could, and that objections without evidence, objections with just, I don't like it or I prefer it, that's a non-negotiable. If you can say yes and it's not lethal, you're expected to say yes to the team. And then your contribution, your signature is helping us with your expertise find how we could. But most people are using their opinions and expertise to tell us why we can't. And that's not very valuable.
Right. And to your point, it is, how do you create a place where employees can contribute to driving that change instead of just being passive and adapting to the change, but how they can really contribute to driving that change?
Absolutely. And what a lot of people want to be involved in designing what the future of their job is going to look like. And I love to have them involved, but they need to understand it's a shared accountability, and they can't drive change without a license. And the license is, the qualifications are that you are aware of why this change is happening, not just from me, but because you're an expert in your industry. You're not shocked when you're in banking and we want to do more online banking. So our discussion isn't your opinion that we should have brick and mortar buildings to do online banking, and you think some people prefer it. Our discussion is, given the disruption in our industry, we're not surprised people want to do online banking, and I'm going to bring my expertise to the table to help us move in that direction.
Right. Step number 3 is don't apologize for an aggressive agenda.
Yeah, I find leaders all the time having sympathy with their teams rather than empathy. Sympathy is, I feel sorry for you, and I agree with you that the problem is our reality and we have too many expectations. And empathy is, I see, given your current skill set and approach, this agenda is aggressive. So let's improve your skill set. Let's change your approach so that you can constantly deliver. And so when you roll out an agenda to a team, a lot of people do it with sympathy. They start by apologizing. They're like, I'm so sorry. You're all so busy right now and you have so much on your plate, but we're being asked by corporate and I don't agree with it, but let's just do the best we can. Instead of walking out with empathy and saying, I've got clarification on the new requirement, I'm going to share what I know about that. And then I want us to focus on how we can deliver this with it being least disruptive to the business. And so many times leaders give the message that buy-in's optional because they're apologizing for what is an aggressive agenda, when the agenda isn't something we leaders thought up. It's what our clients, customers, and the market requires.
Step number 4, ditch the drama.
Yeah, drama is emotional waste. And as I said before, leaders' main role is to eliminate emotional waste from the workplace by insisting and teaching good mental processes. Emotional waste is rid from the workplace from mental processes. And so a mental process is like edit your story. Somebody comes to me and says, my boss is a micromanager, treats me like a child. I say, what do you know for sure what really happened? Well, they called me and checked on the project, but I know why they're doing it, and they're trying to set me up, and they're trying to make me look bad. I'm like, that's your story. What do you know for sure? Well, my boss called and checked on the project. Well, where'd that other stuff come from? Well, I added that. Well, have accountability to the truth. If they called and checked on the project, what would be the best next step to take? Well, it would be update them on the project. Perfect. Let's move effortlessly forward with that. But if I'm a leader and you're coming to me with my boss as a micromanager, and I've got to figure out how I can help you work with a micromanager and how I can help you confront them and change their behavior, and I'm working in a non-reality until I've really cleaned up the reality. And that's what's so important about ditching the drama. And it can be as simple as, in healthcare, somebody came up to me and said, Cy, we got 3 patients dumped on us. And my reply was just a neutral ditching the drama. Okay, we have 3 new patients to be admitted. How would we like to start with that? Because it's the story that's causing everybody the stress, and leaders absolutely need to neutralize and ditch the drama so that we're working with the best of people. And so many people bring drama to work. They go, I'm going to bring my whole self to work. And I tell them, like, do not bring your whole self to work. Bring your most evolved self to work. You are responsible for using good mental processes and being evolved and using the best of you. You're not a victim here. Move out of that place.
Yeah, I agree. It's not looking at the inconvenience, it's looking at the opportunity ahead.
Absolutely.
Step number 5, how to measure employee value.
And I alluded to this earlier in my book, Reality-Based Rules of the Workplace. I present the research on how we were able to isolate the value of one's work. And it isn't just measuring performance, it's measuring my performance. Am I consistently delivering what the organization needs today? But more importantly, it's measuring, am I ready for what's next? Will I still be relevant next year? And then it doesn't just look at what you give the organization. It looks at what you cost the organization in addition to your salary and benefits. What's your emotional expensiveness? What's your drama quotient? So that the number you come up with is the actual value of what you contribute today, what you're staged to contribute in the future, but it takes into account the total cost of you, the chaos that you bring into a process, the interference that you run, the distractions that you bring to the table.
Step number 6, personal accountability is a mindset.
Absolutely. Many people believe it's a skill set. We interviewed hundreds of people that scored high in accountability, and the one thing they told us always is it is a mindset. It is the belief that I can have impact in the world. And people low in accountability believe they're at the mercy of their circumstances. And so you can't teach people with a mindset of victimhood the skill set of accountability. It begins with the mindset.
So is it something that the mindset can be changed once people joined the organization, or is it something that organizations have to be very mindful of when they are hiring?
I believe organizations need to be very mindful of it when they're hiring employees, and that accountability is beyond our individual cultures. It is a core human trait that measures a bit of where you're at in mental evolution. Now, as a therapist, which is my background, I have seen all kinds of people be able to make huge leaps in their accountability levels through therapy and spiritual awakenings and chemical dependency treatment. So for a human being, it's possible. It's just not an investment I think organizations should be making if I were going to be recruiting. In fact, I do recruit for my company, and it is the absolute first core requirement, and we test it regularly.
How do you test accountability?
We begin with behavior-based interview questions where we say, think of a time that you did not deliver as promised and tell us about that. We listen for the word I, where most people don't want I, but then we test it. We, if you're going to train for me, we test it in that if you're a final candidate, we say, tomorrow, your next part of the interview is you'll present to Cy at 8 a.m. on the topic of accountability, and here are the links that we give you to prepare for the material, and we make sure the links are broken and that they cannot reach any of us, and we just see their accountability levels, how resilient they are, how much they own it. Some people come in and go, well, the links were broken, so I won't be able to present this morning. That's low in accountability. Somebody came in, they contacted a cousin of mine on Facebook and had him call one of my kids and alert me that they needed some help. I mean, that person scored high in accountability.
It's interesting because in the interview process, for instance, if some of the tips are you should say we instead of I. meaning that we shows that you are part of a team, you're a team player. If you say I all the time, it's all about you and it's egocentric. At the same time, when you want to test accountability in a candidate, you're going to look at how many times that person uses the I and tells stories about some of the things that she or he has done, some of the things that didn't go so well, and how accountable he or she was for the failure. So how do you manage, or how do you balance out the I and the we when you want to share your own stories?
Great question. We have goals and I have accountability. And so if I say to that question, we had the goal of improving sales 10%, and we as a team didn't meet that goal. And here is my part in it. I assumed, I denied, I chose, I didn't collaborate, I didn't reach out. If you're showing your part in it, it's accountability. If, on the other hand, we hear the word I, it's like, well, I knew we were on the wrong track and no one would listen to me. And I had a horrible boss, and that boss really made it difficult for the entire team. And I tried to go over their head. That person is saying I in an ego way. I know, I'm innocent, I was amazing. Rather than using I in an accounting way, which is like, let me account for my part in that. And so to me, those would be the differences.
Makes total sense. Step number 7, edit your story.
Edit your story is a mental process we use a lot, where we have people just write down the thoughts that are going through their head, and we get it out beyond the ego, and we put it on paper, and then we go through and we edit what's judgment, what's assignment of motive, what is something you added. And the question, what do I know for sure, releases the ego's grip on our reality and gets us closer to the facts. And when you can see the facts, you can move into accountability and engage with the facts, because you're no longer a victim. So even a simple thing like, I walk into a workplace and I'm like, hey, how's it going? They're like, it's crazy today. And I said, oh, I looked at the sales. You guys certainly have been busy. How did it get to crazy? Is it busy or is it crazy? And if you edit your story, you realize it's just busy. You added the crazy part. And then I would say, where'd the crazy come from? Well, I added that. Was it helpful? Has it been helpful to add in the extra stress for the team? Or is it helpful just to see the truth of it, that it's busy? And for people to get responsible for editing their stories so they stop adding in their own drama.
Step number 8, get your employees to say yes.
And we talked a little bit about this, but most people believe their job as an employee is to say no as often as possible to keep us safe. And what I like to teach employees is be prepared to say yes to anything you're asked to do that isn't lethal, that doesn't have a huge risk for the company. Just because it's not your preference, if you can say yes, why not say yes? And so it changes a whole team, because let's say I say, let's go to dinner at the local cafe. If your decision-making process errs towards no, you're like, I don't really feel like it, and I think we should have Chinese. And then your teammate goes, well, no, I want Thai. And then another teammate goes, well, no, I brought my own lunch today. And you will waste an enormous amount of time and have chaos. If your thought process was local cafe, is there something that meets my dietary restrictions? Yep. Will it blow my budget? Nope. It's affordable. Can I bring my lunch with me and eat with the team even though I don't order off the menu? Yep. Okay, I'm in. Most people don't work hard to say yes. They automatically say no. And that is really what distracts from us being able to have some pretty effortless results.
What would you say to someone who asks, oh, no, can you help us with that? And that person says, no, it's not part of my job description.
Usually when people say something like it's not part of my job description, it's emotional blackmail. So I agree with them, because that's how you get out of emotional blackmail. I go, you're absolutely correct. Your job description is a guess at how I thought you would spend some time here. a part of your time. Your role is in this moment to do whatever it takes to, serve our clients. Now, if your objection could be substantiated, you're like, well, I can't help you right now. I have a priority equal in importance, if not more important, and that would take me away from that. What as a team do we want to decide to do? But if you said, can I help you? I can help you without doing the task. I can say, sure, can I help you think through this? Or can I help introduce you to somebody who would be better suited for that task or more effective or have the availability today to do that? But we just go, no, it's not part of my job. And saying the question was, can you help me? And the answer, if the answer is yes, I have 100 ways I can help you. It doesn't necessarily mean I have to drop everything I'm doing and do your job for you.
All right. Step number 9 is my own mantra. Change is an opportunity.
Yeah, I think people just get really hung up on change. And the ability to say yes to what's next is movement into what the universe has in store for you. So if you're not seeing it as an opportunity, if you're seeing it as a burden, you start to see your future as a burden, and you start to see your present as a burden, and you start to see your past as a burden, and you walk through life with burden. It's the number one thing people need to redefine what change means to them. So I would challenge people, think of change and write down your definition of change. It's hard, and it is disruptive, and a lot of people change just for change's sake. And just look at that definition and then see if you can redefine it. Change is opportunity. Change is opening. Change is creativity. Change is a glimpse into a future. Change is me opening portals I didn't know existed to whole new worlds I wouldn't have access to. I think people really need to redefine what change means to them.
I agree. Step number 10, succeed anyway.
Yeah, I tell people, you know what? You're always going to have circumstances, always. Reality will always be there. Succeed anyway. And I hear people, especially in terms of their own engagement, saying, well, I would engage, but they didn't communicate, or I would support, but I wasn't consulted. And here's what I know about your life. You'll have many things you aren't consulted on and expected to report. You will usually not have all the resources you need. You won't have the time you would prefer. It's like, to be accountable and engage, you've got to step up. Given I won't have the resources, I choose to be all in. Given that you came to me a bit later than I prefer in this process, I'm all in. The people who are engaged and happy and successful, and the companies that are successful, have people whose buy-in isn't optional. Buy-in is a verb, and the only way to succeed in any circumstances is succeed anyway.
At this time in the podcast, I usually ask some fun, rapid questions to our guests. And the first question is, I have to ask these very specific questions because we talked a lot about accountability. What was your biggest screw up at work, and what did you learn from it?
You know, this question's a tough one because I can't say I have a biggest screw up. I can tell you that I screw up like only daily. And what did I learn from it? But the most embarrassing screw up is I was training for a very large entity in the U.S. government, and I stopped the training at 2, and we were slated to go till 3. And I basically let hundreds of people go an hour early from the training. And they had very specific goals for me that I didn't accomplish. And what I learned from that for me was that when I was early in my career, I could muscle my way through and be successful because the risk was low if I made a mistake or didn't mind the details. But as my stages have gotten bigger, and I'm now speaking at times to 12,000 people, that I have to pay attention to the details because the risk is gotten so much bigger, and that my next growth opportunity was to focus on clarity, and that when I was in smaller roles. Clarity wasn't as important because my mistakes didn't impact as many people, but I needed to really grow in clarity.
What sound or noise do you love?
Laughter.
The one that you hate?
Dogs. My dog barking during podcasts.
Yeah, that bothers me too. We've been lucky today. What could we spot you doing outside of work that would flabbergast your coworkers?
I would tell you my coworkers know I'm a pretty daring person, but I do a lot of hiking and rappelling, and I've been known to just hang from arches in big national parks, and I think they'd be flabbergasted to see some of the risks I take while hiking.
Did you do the Arches National Park in Utah?
I did. It was phenomenal.
It's awesome. What is your favorite word?
Love.
Your least favorite word?
Hate.
What is the way for our listeners to follow you on social media?
At Cy Wakeman, CYWAKEMAN. And I would tell you that Instagram, we have a YouTube channel that is Cy Wakeman. LinkedIn is Cy Wakeman. We are incredibly prolific on social media and put out a ton of vlogs and video content out there for free. I hope they check it out.
So we'll make sure to share those on the podcast notes as well. Any last word of advice or wisdom for our listeners?
I would say get really good at your own evolution. Evolve or die, frankly. You only have two choices.
Good, and a nice ways to wrap up our conversation today. Thank you so much, Cy, for being with us today.
You are so welcome.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.